James Bliss was no legend of the frontier, though he sure tried to be. Time after time, he set out to carve a name for himself as a feared outlaw of the Old West. He dabbled in everything: gunfighting, rustling, robbery, and whatever shady scheme came his way. He carried more than one name, too, often calling himself C.L. Maxwell. Some folks even knew him as Gunplay Maxwell, though chances are he pinned that flashy nickname on himself. At one point, Bliss did time alongside Butch Cassidy in the Wyoming penitentiary, but even there, he couldn't measure up. Word was Cassidy wanted nothing to do with Maxwell and the Wild Bunch. No matter how hard Maxwell tried to prove himself, he never gained the respect he craved. In the end, his outlaw dreams came crashing down in 1909, when he went out in a blaze against a lawman in Price, Utah. Instead of a legacy, James Bliss left behind the story of a man who spent his life chasing a reputation he could never earn. Alec Barrickman was tied to John Wesley Hardin through marriage, and when young Wes went on the run after his first killings, it was the Barrickman family who gave him shelter. Alec, far from being a steady influence, introduced Hardin to card games, gambling on horse races, and even the tricks of rounding up cattle. Barrickman was by Hardin's side during the deadly shooting of Brown County Deputy Charles Webb. That killing lit a fire under the Texas Rangers, and they wasted no time hunting the outlaws down. On June 1st, 1872, the chase came to a bloody end. In the middle of a gunfight, Alec Barrickman and another man were gunned down, paying the price for riding with one of the deadliest gunmen in Texas. Owning land along the Feliz River in Lincoln County, New Mexico, seemed to carry a curse. In the early 1870s, Robert Casey staked out a dugout and ran cattle there, though he never officially filed a claim. When Casey was murdered in 1875, the property passed into the hands of John Tunstall, who pushed Casey's family aside and took it for himself. But Tunstall's life ended violently, too, gunned down in 1878 during the bloody Lincoln County War. His old rival, James Dolan, soon took over the land, building a large home on the site. Dolan outlived them both, but even he met his end there, struck down by a cerebral hemorrhage in 1898. Andy Blevins, better known as Andy Cooper, was a Texas tough who made his living stealing cattle. When the law closed in on him, his father, and his brothers, the clan drifted west to Arizona, where they picked up the same rustling habits around Holbrook. On September 2, 1887, Andy and a few companions gunned down 2 leaders of a rival sheepherder faction. He bragged about the killings, but his boasting didn't last long. Just 2 days later, Sheriff Commodore Perry Owens rode up to the Blevins' cabin and evened the score, killing Andy along with 2 others in a blaze of gunfire. In the spring of 1874, a Kiowa medicine man named Issa Tai, whose name translates to Wolf's Vulva, stirred up warriors with a bold promise. He claimed the white man's bullets could never harm them. Fired up by his vision, about 250 Kiowa, Comanche, and Southern Cheyenne fighters rode out under the leadership of Quanah Parker. Their target was a small camp of buffalo hunters at a lonely Texas outpost called Adobe Walls. Issa Tai, painted and riding nearly naked except for a crown of sage, led the charge. But the promise of magic protection quickly met hard reality. The hunters' rifles spoke loud, and the bullets tore through the warriors. At least 25 attackers fell that day, proving they were not shielded from harm. One shot in particular became legend. Marksman Billy Dixon leveled his Sharp's Big 50 Buffalo gun and fired at a rider nearly a mile away. The bullet found its mark, dropping the warrior from his horse at 1,530 yards, a shot still remembered as one of the longest ever made in the Old West. June 18, 1878, outlaw Nick Worthington was seen loitering outside the St. James Hotel in Cimarron, New Mexico. A posse of armed men moved in and ordered him to give himself up. Instead of surrendering, Worthington bolted, hoping to make a run for it. He didn't get far. A single bullet caught him in the back, ending his flight for good. Worthington's trail of crime had already marked him for death. He was wanted for stealing government mules and for the cold-blooded killing of 2 black soldiers down in Texas. Before they turned outlaw, the Dalton brothers wore badges. But the lure of fast money pulled them down a darker trail. Growing up, they'd heard plenty of stories about Missouri outlaws, especially their cousins, the Youngers, and soon enough, they wanted that same kind of notoriety. Banks and trains became their targets, but in 1892 they decided to attempt something even Jesse James never dared, robbing 2 banks at the same time. On October 5th, in their old hometown of Coffeyville, Kansas, they tried it. The plan fell apart fast. Local townsfolk grabbed rifles and fought back with a vengeance. When the smoke cleared, 4 citizens lay dead, and so did 4 of the Daltons, including Bob and Grat. That daring gamble to outdo the James gang had turned into the Dalton gang's final ride. In 1859, Nicholas Porter Earp, the patriarch of the legendary Earp clan, was serving as a constable in Monmouth, Illinois. But the lawman wasn't exactly walking the straight and narrow. He was arrested and convicted for bootlegging, and when he couldn't pay the fines, his farm was sold off at auction. Just 2 days later, Nicholas packed up his family and headed back to Pella, Iowa. Still, Monmouth wasn't through with him. He returned often, dragged back into town by lawsuits and accusations ranging from tax evasion to misusing public funds. Even before his famous sons carved out their names in frontier history, the Earp story was already tangled with law, liquor, and controversy. In 1879, the folks of Las Vegas, New Mexico, found a grim new purpose for the windmill standing in the town plaza. The well it once served had gone dry years before, but the structure wasn't left idle for long. That year, vigilantes used it to hang 2 accused killers. The following February, 3 more men, blamed for the murder of the city marshal, met the same fate. The crowd didn't stop at a hanging. They filled the bodies with lead for good measure. By the spring of 1880, the windmill had become too dark a reminder. Come April, the townspeople tore it down. On April 19, 1908, in the mining camp of Skidoo, California, a bartender named Joe Hooch Simpson shot down the town banker, Jim Arnold, and stole just $20. Justice came quickly. 3 days later, a mob of townsfolk hauled Hooch to a telegraph pole and hanged him. That same pole carried the wire that spread news of the lynching to the outside world. 2 days later, a reporter from the Los Angeles Times arrived, hoping to capture a photograph. Trouble was, Hooch had already been buried, but the locals weren't about to disappoint, so they dug him up, brushed him off, and strung him up again, all for the camera's sake. Hooch's reputation was as rough as the town itself. He was known to frequent Skidoo's red light district, and after his death, the town doctor cut off his head to test for syphilis, suspecting the disease might explain his violent outburst. Legend has it that the twice-hanged headless Hooch still roams the barren hills of Death Valley. Today, all that's left of old Skidoo is a weathered historical marker, standing not far from Stovepipe Wells,